Hello and welcome to this webinar delivered by the ISM Trust. The ISM Trust, the Incorporated Society of Musicians' sister charity, works to ensure that all music professionals in the UK can reach their full potential. We create pioneering resources to support all those who work in music and seek to challenge, educate and inspire through webinars, seminars, events, printed and digital resources and advice packs. I am Maria Visitivo and I am Member Engagement and Events Officer at the ISM. It is my pleasure to be joined by Ivor Flint for today's webinar on preparing for live online examinations. Before we begin, I have a few points for you. If you experience any technical difficulties such as sound quality issues, please let us know in the chat box and we'll attempt to resolve the issue. If you wish to use them, subtitles are available by adjusting the setting on your webinar at the bottom of the screen. This webinar is being recorded and will be available to view on the ISM Trust's website at ismtrust.org/webinars, as well as on our YouTube channel. If you have any questions, please let us know in the questions box and we will endeavour to answer as many of them as possible at the end. Now, without further ado, I will hand over to Ivor for the presentation and I hope you enjoy.
So good afternoon, everybody. My name's Ivor Flint. I'm a senior examiner at the London College of Music, and I also teach online. And I've conducted about thousands of exams by now, online exams by now. So I just would like to talk a little bit about preparing online exams, and these will be the kind of exams that. Sorry, the presentation is actually as a generic presentation, so not specific to any one board. So first of all. I think it's important to understand that the online exams really are the same as in-person exams. The only difference being, of course, is that they're digital. So instead of me as an examiner being in the room with your candidates, I'm going to be here in Kent, and my candidate, so the candidate could be anywhere in India, in Czechoslovakia, in the Czech Republic, in Birmingham, wherever. So it's exactly the same. I think it's always good to know that the digital options allow a lot of flexibility for candidates in terms of the choice that they've got to actually succeed and progress. And there is flexibility within the boards, within each of the boards. So it's worth checking, what the boards are offering and what is most suitable and appropriate to your particular students. And again, we can deliver these worldwide, so it doesn't matter where in the world wide. Certainly from LCME's perspective, we do them 24 hours, 365 days a year. Well, maybe 364. But it's important also to understand that the exams have been all of them quality assured by Ofqual, and all of the regulators have approved them, and they are now proven and acceptable effective way of actually making an assessment. So they sit in exactly the same way as a recorded exam and exactly the same way as a live face-to-face exam. So there's no difference in terms of the rigor, if you like, of the outcome. So in terms of preparing for an online exam, it's exactly the same as you would prepare for a face-to-face exam, an ordinary exam. What I would suggest is worthwhile spending time doing is rehearsing with your student using the equipment that you've got to hand. Yeah, so maybe perhaps have some online lessons, maybe, or a session where you actually ask your student to play and to do some maybe oral tests and a bit of sight reading online. And you can again incorporate these ideas into your lessons as well. So you might be able to experiment first in the lesson and just do a little bit and then take it outside. But I think the more you acclimatize your students to the digital world and using this as a means of communication, I think the better equipped they will be on the day when they do their exams. Sight reading is something else that different boards have slightly different requirements. So again, you need to check that. Certainly we do it using screen sharing. So for us, we would make sure that you had the ability to screen share. So either to move your device or connect a second device so that's available for sight reading. So a second device or a movable device is useful if you can do that. And again, it's exactly the same. Candidates given the sight reading, they're given the appropriate preparation time, according to each board, and then off you go. So not really a great deal of difference. It's just that it's on a screen rather than on a piece of paper. And the oral tests, again, are delivered in exactly the same way. Now, and again, there are slight variations in the board. So some examiners will play on their piano, and that will be obviously the same as me talking to you now. So I will play on my piano at home and do the oral tests that way, as the same as I would do them inside an exam room if I was there in person. Or alternatively, some of the boards have the opportunity to actually do it through the platform. So they're pre-recorded oral tests and the examiner just controls them. So they're played directly through the speaker of the candidate's device. So you'll find either of both of those systems in operation. Not all boards do discussion. At London College of Music, we do discussion. But I would suggest that for the discussion, the candidates, even if they're doing their discussion, if they're doing their performance pieces from memory, I would recommend that you make sure that they've got their music in the exam room for any discussion, because they may need to refer to those. Yeah, and again, it's exactly the same style and the same sort of questions that you would get in an in-person exam. So again, it's not really very different, apart from the fact that the examiner is not in the same room. One of the things that people quite often ask is about latency. Over the past 18 months, 2 years since we've been doing this, I think probably most of the boards have worked quite hard to make sure that that latency problem is dealt with. So, for example, in a clapping test, or keeping time test, it's quite easy now for us to actually make sure that the candidate is actually doing what we intended, and if they're not doing what we intended, it's actually very clear, because the latency has really been improved. And certainly from our perspective, we've done a lot of work to tweak things so that we can get the best possible connection with wherever we are in the world doing our exams. And I think most of the boards have got their own bespoke platforms now that they're using. I don't think anyone's using anything that's generic or that's not been tweaked to accommodate live online exams. And the other thing is that certainly from LCME, and I would imagine the other boards too, all of the examiners have had extra training to enable them to understand the parameters and how to work effectively and get the best results from online exams and give the best experience to the candidate, because ultimately I think that's sacrosanct, making that sure that the candidate's experience is a beneficial one, regardless of what the format is. And I think the other thing is that it's worth checking just to see whether the board that you're going to be using does a pre-exam check to make sure that the connection is okay. Certainly at LCME we do, but other boards may have maybe a slightly different way. So before the exam, again, what would that take? You need to check your connection, make sure that your router's working, make sure that there's no sort of loose wiring or dodgy plugs anywhere. When you do your connection check with the board that you're using, if they do that, it's important to do it on the same piece of equipment that you're actually going to use for the exam. So the same PC, the same desktop, whatever you're using, use the same device and in the same room. Yeah, so the acoustics in the sound in the check are the same. Yeah, also it's worth just checking the lighting just to make sure that you can see and make sure that the candidate can be seen. And if there are any additional requirements that a particular board might have beyond those, it's worth investigating, but they should all be stated on their websites and in their rules for online exams. The other thing is that you might find there's a slight variation in rules relating to accompanists. So you might find that some boards prefer the accompanist is in sight. Some boards don't have any particular regulation about that. Some boards may have a very strict rules about live accompaniments as opposed to using recorded accompaniments. And obviously in COVID times, it's not always possible to have an accompanist in the same room as a candidate in a live exam. So check any rules that pertain to particular boards. And I think the other thing is, how do you prepare? Well, again, online teaching is a good way of preparing and acclimatizing your students. And I'm sure many of you now have actually had to do that because over the past year, that's been the only way to deliver lessons. And so again, you can, if you haven't done that, then it's worth experimenting, doing it once with a session in your own home and with your student in their home. And also it's worth using a laptop or a tablet with some sight reading tests so that your student is actually prepared for that. So they're not just suddenly changing from doing sight reading on a piece of paper to sight reading on a device. So the more practice you get, I think the easier it is for the candidate in the exam to just adjust to it immediately because they're used to doing it. And again, you can experiment, I think, a little bit with doing online oral tests and see how you get on with that. Again, acclimatizing your students will just make it go so much more easy for them in the exam, and they're likely to perform much better. And again, you can always record a performance or a part of the lesson using that, and just do a little bit of analysis as to what works and what doesn't work. And that really is it. So I think the important thing to understand is that it's an online exam, it's a digital exam, but it's the same as a face-to-face exam. The only difference is the examiner is remote, and the oral tests and the sight reading tests are going to be delivered digitally with most exam boards. But always check that for any other things like, as I say, accompanists. And that's really what I've got to add to that. So sorry it's short, but really there isn't much to say apart from practice, experiment, and enjoy. So Maria, questions?
Thank you, Ivor. Yes. Any questions, please send them through. We have received one so far. So anything you can think of, just please put it in the Q&A box, and we'll get to them. So the first one is asking, we can get online. Sorry, I think it means where can we get online practice sight reading tests?
Oh, that's a very good question. I suppose actually, what I did when I first started doing this was I just Googled stuff and just selected things for that, just little tiny images on Google and just experimented with that. And then I just produced my own, really. It's just really I mean, if you take a photograph if you take an image of something you want to use and then just put it onto your device, that would be sufficient, because that's basically all that we as the boards have done. It's nothing special. We just transferred the sight reading tests to a digital format, so it's the same. But it's just getting used, I think, to actually it's on a screen and it's slightly resized, as opposed to actually in a book where you can see it. And it's just getting accustomed to that, which I think most candidates would do very quickly with a bit of practice.
Sure. Okay, thank you. Okay, let's see, we've got another one. Can a student book more than one exam at the same time if they've been studying for more than one grade, for example?
Again, that would probably be dependent on the board. Certainly with LCM exams, yes, you could, obviously, but so you could just do separate entries for if you're doing, say, grade 1 and grade 2, then you would just do 2 separate entries, and they could do them on the same day. There's nothing to prevent them from doing that if it's possible to schedule that. But again, different boards have different regulations. Check with your board.
Of course. We've got another question. I would like to ask, what happens if a candidate's computer connection goes in the middle of an exam? Do they let it go, or? Very good question.
Very good question. Certainly, where I work, we would endeavour to re-establish that connection as quickly as possible. And if it wasn't possible to do that for some reason that's beyond our technical control, then we would reschedule the exam and either resume where we were, yes, or alternatively, if we needed to restart the exam from the beginning, which is unlikely, unless it was very early on in the exam, we would do that. So actually, certainly from my perspective as an examiner, I would want to do whatever's in the candidate's best interest. I would not want to disadvantage them because something went wrong technically, and I don't think any board would, really, to be fair.
Do you see this online exam option as a thing that's going to happen going forward?
Yes, I think online exams are here to stay. I mean, I think we live in a digital world, whether we like it or not. I mean, yeah, I love doing in-person exams, of course, but the reality, the economics, from economics, health and safety, nobody knows what's going to happen in the future. What I think it has done is I think it's made exams far more accessible to people that wouldn't normally be able to take them. So I know that from my own perspective as an examiner, I mean, I'll give you an example of, I was examining in India a couple of years ago, and there was a candidate who traveled a day and a half to come and do our exams because that was the only time. So he couldn't do an exam every year because it was, there was a huge cost in that, involved in that. However, digital exams means that the world is at your fingertips, and we can examine anywhere at more or less any time. But again, different boards have different ways of structuring their timetabling for their online exams. So have a look around and see what suits you. But they are here to stay. They are here to stay, definitely. So there's an offer. There's a range of offers: face-to-face, recorded, digital, live online.
Mm-hmm. Someone's asking, just interested to know, what platform do you use to conduct the exam?
Zoom. We use Zoom.
That's great. And taking a photo of the music, putting it online, does that not break copyright laws?
I'm not taking photocopies of music and putting it online. Okay. So I write my own sight reading tests by experimenting with Google. I wasn't putting them online, actually. So just to be clear, I was just showing somebody something that's already there anyway. So the copyright thing is, and also it's educational, and I wasn't reproducing anything. So no, I'm acutely conscious of that one. Yeah. Sorry, you've frozen, Maria.
Referring to when you said to kind of get the students used. Oh, sorry, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can. Yeah.
Okay, great. If you're referring to, for students to get used to reading off an iPad, I think just taking a photo of a piece of music that you already have, if you don't have any intention of
if you're worried, just delete it straight away.
Yeah.
Or save it for the next. Yeah. So
I think we're fine. Okay. Next. The question is, for a piano exam following this format, the camera will presumably need a clear view of the student and the instrument. With this in mind, would the examiner ever deduct marks or comment on incorrect fingering, providing it doesn't impede the flow of the scales / arpeggios being played?
Generally, I think in general, I would imagine, and I can't speak for all boards, but generally we would not comment on fingering because there are different ways of fingering a scale, and that is a whole can of worms. So I'll give you a really good example of something that I saw in an exam. This was a live exam, and it was a boy who had to play G major scale staccato in the right hand, and he did it with one finger perfectly, and it had shape, it was beautifully articulated, and it had a lovely sort of contour in terms of the gradation of tone, ascending and descending a little tiny bit. Should I have commented on the fact that he should have used more than one finger? Ultimately, I think that would have been inappropriate, because what are we really looking for? I would hope that actually what we're interested in is a performance, and that was certainly a performance, even if the fingering wasn't perhaps standard. So no, but I think as long as we can see the candidate clearly and the fingers, if they're playing a guitar or a flute or a clarinet, as long as we've got clear sight of that in shot, that's that's fine. And that's usually what those pre-checks are for, just to make sure that all those things are set up appropriately, and the lighting.
Okay. So someone says, people might wish to know this: laptops with Windows S will not download any apps which are not Microsoft, such as Zoom. This is why I have my laptop still for communication. So thank you for.
Thank you. That's useful to know.
If everyone's aware of this, are there any kind of common things that you could let us know that could go wrong in like that happened to go wrong for you? Like any, I don't know.
I mean, the most catastrophic was losing a connection and then having to re-establish it, and then just, I suppose, reassuring the candidate that we weren't deducting marks for that, and there was no, and I think I would like to think that anyone who's examining actually, has got the good sense and the humility and the compassion to actually not unfair, not penalize somebody for something that's outside their control, and to resume the exam in an appropriate and an appropriate manner. Other things that go wrong occasionally with latency, there have been the odd times when with a say a clapping exam. But usually what you can generally tell actually whether someone's clapping or conducting in time. You can generally tell because you're aware of when you start and when they start. So, and yeah, it's just something that you just get to experience with using the platforms and using digital exams. So that's the only other thing I can think of. I think occasionally, sometimes with certain instruments, I'll give you electric rock guitar. If they're using a distortion pedal or an effects pedal, sometimes the device isn't quite sure which signal to focus on. So again, you can get a little bit of, as an examiner, you have to kind of listen very carefully. But as examiners, I hope we are listening very carefully anyway. You just have to listen a bit extra carefully sometimes in certain circumstances. And I think I think the other thing that I just tend to pay attention to is just intonation, particularly classical singers and also string instruments, because you may be missing some upper harmonics. However, you can still tell what we're looking at the performance, so you can factor that in, consciously or subconsciously. But I wouldn't want to make any hard and fast rules about that. But generally, it's not been a problem. I've not had any particular problems at all.
Okay. So for sending footage of students for teaching exams, can you edit this to the best 20 minutes, or does it have to be uninterrupted?
Okay, from our perspective, we'd want to see an uninterrupted a 20-minute of teaching or half an hour of teaching, or whatever it was. I can't speak for what other boards say, but I know we would expect start and finish unedited if it's for a teaching exam.
Okay, I think that she mentions, I just asked because the student I choose always has had a longer than usual warm up because he or she was stressed or nervous and a bit older, so this was how we always started class.
Oh, well, in that case, warn that if you're doing a teaching exam and you're preparing a video for it, just get that bit out of the way first, and then maybe a little tiny little bit of it that's appropriate to the lesson, so that you've made it comfortable for your student. I don't think anybody would have any objections to that. A bit of a pre-warm up, no, it's fine.
Okay, sure. Is there anything you can recommend, or that people have done to improve latency on the end of the student?
I can't think of anything actually, apart from just practice, like anything, just practice and see how things go. And if you do get the opportunity to practice with your student at home and wherever you are, see what happens. You might. I mean, I have to say that currently I'm in Kent, and the internet I've got here is super fast and absolutely remarkable. However, my mobile phone connection is not so good. In London, my mobile phone connection is brilliant, but although I've got a good internet connection, it's nowhere near as good as it is here, which is quite strange considering I live in central London. So there's all these peculiar variations in the country. But
I mean, I think the other thing is, I don't know if the students in a house with lots of people, if they cannot use the internet for that period.
Yes, that's a good idea. Yeah. Just make sure that your brother or your sister isn't playing video games on there. So you wouldn't want to try and keep it, keep that the usage down. I mean, the other thing that really fascinated me, I've got some clients that I teach in India, and I was amazed that I could actually accompany my student sitting here in Kent while they're in India, the other side of the world, and I could accompany them, and I was amazed at that on Zoom. That really wasn't expecting that actually.
Yes, lots of the pandemic has taught us lots of.
And I think that all of the internet providers, the VoIP providers, have really stepped up to the balls, and the improvements. I think using video, especially when you're over long distances, has improved beyond so much.
I think the only other question we've got so far is in kind of the positioning of the student. I feel like we've covered a bit, so it's important to kind of see their fingers. Would you say it's important, like a full body shot or anything like that, or just mainly?
I think the only time you probably need a full body shot is someone's shot. Full body shot is if somebody is doing probably a musical theatre exam or a drama and communication exam, or acting, or probably for a classical singer, you might want to just see them from the sort of waist upwards, so that you've got a reasonable picture of what's going on.
Super.
And of course, if it's a classical exam and they're doing opera, you might want to, they might include a little bit more movement, a little bit more space in that, as opposed to singing a bit of Schubert Lieder.
Super, great. Okay, well, we seem to be out of questions, which is great. If any of you watching can come up with any other questions afterwards, please send this through to us, and we'll pass them on to Ivor. So thank you very much for a lovely presentation. Thank you all for tuning in. As I mentioned, the webinar will be available on our website, hopefully from this evening or maybe tomorrow. Our website also has a range of webinars available if you want to check any of them out. There's also lots of other resources that support the sector, many of which are available for free. If you would like to find out more about our work or are interested in ISM membership, you can find more details on our website, which is ism.org. Just FYI, ISM membership is open to all UK music professionals and offer legal advice and representation, comprehensive insurance and specialist services. Our next webinar will be on the 5th of November, and it will be regarding our newly launched resource, How to be a Workshop Leader. So please have a look on our website. And lastly, again, it just leaves me to say another thank you, and thank you to Ivor, thank you all for attending, and we hope to see you at another ISM webinar soon. I hope you have a lovely rest of your afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks.